So we are going to kick off the meeting of the Town of Ashford Planning and Zoning Commission for Monday, June 14th, 2021. Valerie, have you been able to capture the guests? Sorry, yes, no? Valerie, you're muted. You're muted, Valerie. Go ahead. Have you been, oops, no, you were good there. Go back. Okay. We'll go with it. Starting out, we'll look to the seating of alternates, which should go very, very quickly because we do not have any alternates. And so the board will consist of Nord, Alex, Mark, Janet, Dick, and Jerry. Okay, I think I've captured everyone there. Any public comment at this point? Oh, excuse me, I'm jumping ahead. Approval of minutes of our May 10th meeting, 2021.
I have a couple corrections.
Okay, what do you have?
Wait a minute, let me find them. On the second page, under water quality,
Yes.
I'm quoted, Miss Bellamy did not know the worst water quality measurement. That should be changed to did not know the water quality after a heavy rain.
Okay.
And on the last page, under the zoning officer report, on the second paragraph, it says Chair noted the Ashford Board of Selectmen is discussing noise and light ordinances. I believe that should be blight. Is that correct?
Correct, yes, with an extra B in there. Thank you.
What is that?
It should be a blight ordinance, not a light ordinance.
Oh. Okay.
Good catch, Janet.
And with those corrections, I'll move the minutes be accepted.
I'll make one statement on item 6, unfinished business. On B, paragraph 2. Jeff, you had seemed to chide me for sending things out to the entire commission, when indeed I had only sent documents to you, Alex, and Mike.
I wasn't chiding you, Dick. It was a general statement to the group. I didn't mention your name in that. I know it's in juxtaposition, but I wasn't chiding you. I was just reminding the entire group.
And in that same vein, when I saw what was on the agenda tonight, I sent you, Alex, and Mike the complete copy of the bill that was passed and a legislative review of a summary of what was in that bill. And I would ask, at some point when we get to talk about that, that should be sent out to the commission.
Yes, we'll have two documents, actually. We'll have a review from OLR that you provided, and I'd like to get your comments on that review, as well as the review by I got to get all the initials in there, the CCAPA, which is the Connecticut chapter of American Planning Association. And they have an interpretation also very, very similar to the two, both unbiased, nonpartisan groups doing that. And as part of the discussion afterwards, we will send out that material to each of the members. I agree with you. Okay, no further changes to the minutes. Okay, we will bring that up for approval then with our next meeting of the minutes on that. Quickly, public comment, anything? Oh, and Tom Hastings has joined us. Let's see if anyone else has. Tom, I'm going to have you seated for Catherine Sampson.
Okay,
Okay, so Tom, you are seated. You got that, Valerie?
Yes,
Thank you.
so the minutes were not approved as corrected, is that? Because Janet made a motion, but
Oh, I'm sorry, Janet, did you make a motion? I missed that entirely. I was just
Oh,
listening to
I did make a motion to approve them as corrected.
as amended. Okay,
Yep.
all right. Okay, so we have a motion to approve them as amended. We can move forward with that. Is there a second?
I'll second.
who's
Alex,
that?
Alex,
all those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
aye,
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions for those who were not here? And it passes. Thank you very much. Okay. Again, moving on to public comment. Any public comment to offer up to the board? And I won't wait 13 seconds. We'll move forward. Okay. So we are going to open the public hearing for the application of NJV LLC regarding a text amendment application to Article B, Section 3. And to give a little further indication that the applicant requests an amend to the zoning regulations to permit existing campgrounds in the residential agricultural RA zone to engage in new construction, site improvements, expansion, etc., subject to issuance of a special permit. Proposed text attached into the application. Okay, so for the public hearing, we will go as follows. We will hear from the applicant and the applicant's representative. We'll hear from other interested parties, should they wish to share. We'll have clarifying questions from the board members. Ask for a summation from the applicant and the representative, and then look to the potential receipt of the application. Along those lines, representing the applicant is Dorian Famigaletti of Kahan, Karinsky, and Capocella from Vernon. And those of you who don't know who NJV LLC is, and his face being up here, that is the Briley Campground for reference sake.
Jeff, can I jump in for a second? I would ask that Dory, before she goes into the overall discussion of this, since what she submitted to us is pretty voluminous, that she would give us a summary of really what she is attempting to accomplish.
Okay, well, I'm sure that's going to be part of her presentation, Dick, as opposed to jumping right into that right now. I did want to get across a couple of things, such as some prerequisites. I wanted to check with our zoning enforcement officer that all applications and fees have been provided for the applicant.
yes, they have.
Okay, and can we confirm that there's been a filing with the town clerk regarding an amendment change?
Yes, and I ran the legal notices and we did the regional agency referrals.
To NECOG and CROG?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So not to steal any more of your thunder, Dory, we'll let you speak to the application.
Thank you. For the record, although I think I've already been introduced, I'm Dory Famigaletti from Kahan, Karinsky, and Capocella. I'm a land use lawyer and I'm representing Brian Spizialski and his family entities, which are both NJV, which is the landowner, and Briley Campground, which is the campground that operates there on the property. So in a nutshell, I'm just going to make it real quick for Commissioner Williams. In a nutshell, what we're looking to do is allow for this legally existing non-conforming use, which is a campground, to expand, enlarge, allow additions, perhaps create additional campsites in the future, subject to the issuance of a special permit. And I'm going to, as I go through my presentation, I'll explain why we need to do it that way. But in a nutshell, this really doesn't change any of the status quo with regard to the campground right now, because the campground is legally non-conforming, but it would allow for some future growth. So we'll get into that in a moment. Before we go there, I assume most of you are familiar with Briley Campground, but I do have, if I can share my screen, I have a very brief 2-minute video I'd like to show you, just for anyone who hasn't been to the campground, a very brief overview of what's there, so you can see what we're trying to achieve by this regulation amendment. Is that something that I can do?
Yep. Go for it.
Feel free, go right ahead, yes.
Okay, thank you. So if I can share my screen, hopefully I can figure that out. Hold on one second.
Just change the permission, so you should be all set.
Okay, and I just screwed something up here with my screen, so bear with me for one moment. Okay. Okay. Share screen. And where is that? I had it. Here we are. Okay, this should be opening right here for me now. Can you all see this?
We can see an email.
Oh, can you hear this?
No.
I hear nothing as of yet.
You're not seeing this?
No, just still seeing the email.
Okay, hold on one second. That didn't work, huh? Because it's running on my screen right now.
Do you have two screens open?
No. All right, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm not a pro at the share screen. Brian, are you,
Yeah,
can you
I can
figure
do
this
it.
out?
Yeah, we got it,
Okay.
guys.
There we go.
Can't see this here. No sound, but we can see.
Excuse me. No.
Well, I'm sorry we didn't have the audio on that. I don't know what happened there, but it was a really nice video that was just recently prepared for the campground. It gives you a flavor, if you haven't been out there, for what to expect and what it encompasses. The campground's been there for many years. As I mentioned, it predated, or it was actually in existence at a time when the zoning regulations allowed for campgrounds. So it's been there for many years, operated by my client's family for that whole time. And it's I believe, a very well-known campground with a great reputation. It draws a number of people all season long. And I think, you know, you should be proud of it. I think it is a treasure for the town. So what we're trying to achieve here, and I don't know if we, Brian, I don't know if we want to stop sharing that now and take that down. What we're trying to achieve here is something that actually was allowed under the regulations until not all that long ago. So just for a historical standpoint, the regulations initially, when the campground came into being, allowed for campgrounds with a special permit. Then I believe it was in 2004 where the regulations changed and said no more campgrounds except the ones that are there, which I believe is only my clients. But at that time, there was still a provision in the regulations that allowed for new construction, additions and new campsites and other improvements at existing campgrounds with a special permit. However, in 2014, when there was a large rewrite of the regulations, all reference to campgrounds, including that section, were deleted from the regulations. So the effect was Briley was and still is a non-conforming campground. Again, non-conforming because it existed at a time when the regulations allowed for it. So it was appropriately permitted to begin with. The regulations have since changed. So now, although the regulations don't allow for additional campgrounds, existing uses are allowed to continue. The status quo, as I mentioned, really won't change with the adoption of this regulation. You still can't get new campgrounds in town. But what this will do is it'll bring us back to the pre-2014 situation where for an existing campground, you can allow for certain changes to be made. Because as a non-conforming use, you probably know you're kind of strictly regulated. Status quo is okay. You can do what you were originally permitted to do, but you're really hampered on the ability to expand or enlarge. So that keeps this business from being able to grow. And that's what we're trying to find a way to allow for controlled growth, and controlled because it'll be controlled by the issuance of a special permit like it previously was. So again, this regulation will apply only to future growth and expansion at the campground, not to what was originally and previously permitted before the regulations changed. We do think it's important to consider this regulation because, as I mentioned, being a non-conforming use, it does really limit a business's ability to grow and adapt and change and modify as times dictate. We think it's important in particular for this business to be able to grow because it's a destination family campground. It draws a number of people to town every year, and those people patronize the town's other local businesses. The campground generates a significant amount of taxes, both from the taxes that are paid by my client, but also the taxes that are paid by the campers there for their campers and equipment. I think roughly $125,000 a year is what's generated in taxes. It's also a good local employer. My client employs 35 employees, 15 of which are full-time employees and 20 which are seasonal, but those seasonal employees are primarily local students who go to E.O. Smith in Yukon. So for all of these reasons, I think that Riley Campground is a very valuable business in town, and to give it the ability to grow and adapt to changing needs as situations require, as long as you have some control over that by way of special permit issuance, we think is a good thing. So with that, I'd like to walk you through the framework of the regulation amendment. And as it's been pointed out, it is quite lengthy, but I'm going to try to boil it down and break it down for you as to what's pertinent about it. The very first thing we did is with an amendment to Article 4B, which is your general RA zone regulations under special permit uses, which is Section 3. We're just going to propose to add a new Section 18, which would allow campgrounds, which were established again prior to January 12th, 1987. And that's the operative date that was used in prior versions of the regulations. So we just carried it through here. So it will allow those with a special permit, a campground that was pre-existing in accordance with some more specific regulations that we're going to set forth in Article 4B, Section 10. And 4B, Section 10, applicable to campgrounds, is going to talk now about the special permit process, that if you want to do an addition an expansion, new construction, new sites, any of those things at an existing campground will require a special permit. And we set forth all the criteria for that now. Again, status quo, what's already been approved doesn't change, but anything above and beyond that would come to you for a special permit and have to comply with these new regulations. So the purpose section, I already referenced there in Article 4B, Section 10A. That's the purpose section, which is to allow for the growth and expansion of existing.
Dory, if I can
Yes.
interrupt you,
Mhm.
by inserting item 18 in there, that would make the existing campgrounds conforming as opposed to non-conforming. Is that correct?
Well, partially. Say partially because it'll be kind of a split entity at this point. It's legally non-conforming with regard to what's existing. But any changes from that, from what had been previously approved and was blessed as legally non-conforming, is allowed with special permits. So it doesn't convert necessarily the entire thing, but it gives us a mechanism to find a permitted use path forward for enlargements, expansions, things like that, which you normally couldn't do with a non-conforming use.
So you're saying
Is that it?
anything that was done from 2014 till the potential application change of this amendment falls under non-conforming?
Anything that was legally permitted before the regulations change would still continue to be a non-conforming protected use. It's just anything that hasn't been permitted, we now have a path forward
Right.
to get permits so we can perhaps add some campsites, perhaps add a new building if we need a new community building, a new toilet facilities building, things like that. Otherwise, solely as a non-conforming use, we can't expand the footprint. So we're very strapped
Understood.
with what we can do.
Along those same lines, in the non-conforming portion, we recently had approved going forward to add some ADA compliant bathroom facilities to the existing building. Brian,
Okay.
is that still ongoing? Is it completed?
You're on mute, Brian.
How about that?
Yep.
Okay. So there are two sections to this building that we are working with Randy and Jim at the zoning department. I should say at the building inspectors. So the first building, yes, the half of it, Mr. Williams, is already installed. That is all ADA compliant. That's gone through the state, Sean Merrigan, as well as Eastern Highlands. So all those are to code and worked with the building inspector as well. As you probably saw in that video, and what Dory is alluding to, we had part of our building come down in some storms and damage this year. So that's what the tent is up for. So, part of these regs that Dory is explaining is because now we need to rebuild that section of the building. And even though the first half was approved already, this being a non-conforming use really limits us from putting anything additional, even if it was, like Dory said, maybe a bathroom building. So to answer your question, the first part is up, the bathrooms are up, they're fully functional, inspected. As a matter of fact, Eastern Highlands out today for the annual inspection. So that part is up, approved, done, everything is done with that. So that answers your question. Yes, our ADA, everything is compliant to everything that needs to be.
Thank you.
Dory, please continue.
Yes, okay, thank you. So now in section B of the campground section, campground occupancy, we know that this has always been a real sticking point for the town, and we're leaving it in here, but actually not leaving it in here. We're resurrecting it from prior versions. During a lot of consideration over the years, the history of this campground, I think one of the driving factors and concerns was to prevent any residency based on use of these campsites. And we think, the public health code, by the way, does define campgrounds as temporary living sites. So it never contemplates that you would claim residency because of that, but we don't want to rely on just that inference from the public health code. I know that you had concerns in your prior versions of the regulations to make sure of it. So we really resurrected a lot of the language from prior versions of your regs having to do with campsite occupancy. And that's you're going to find spelled out here with regard to what we need to do and what kind of records we need to have from the people who come and rent campsites to ensure that they have a principal residence elsewhere. This section also talks about the time frame for when the campground can operate. And the general time frame that we chose here is April 1 to November 30th. Now, in full disclosure, prior versions of your regulations said April 1 to October 31st. But then it said you could do November on weekends and holidays, and also the Friday after Thanksgiving. And that just sounded kind of cumbersome to me. It seemed like, you know, a decent chunk of November anyway. So I just thought for simplicity's sake, we would just extend that and say, okay, the occupancy of these sites will be from April 1st till November 30th. So we didn't have to carve out all those exceptions. And then in B2 here, this is actually something that was added to your regulations in 2011 and then went away in 2014 when all reference to the campgrounds went away. So in 2011, under a prior application, the Spizialski family came to the commission and asked for a regulation amendment to allow them to have a certain number of winter season campsites. I think it was limited in number at that point. I had some discussions with Mike D'Amato when I was drafting this, and he said, you know, I'm not sure we need to necessarily limit it in number as long as we clearly show it on a site plan and identify where those sites are. But so this was something that was allowed in 2011, specifically to allow to have some year-round campsites. Now, again, that doesn't allow for year-round residency. It's just year-round temporary campsites. And that's why all of those residency requirements are built in. We have to verify in our records that anyone who's coming here provides proof of residence at another location. So that's what B is all about. B is about, again, the duration, the time period for the campsites and the proof of residency elsewhere, and then using certain campsites with the permission of the PZC. So those, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I think 16 sites are winterized now. Is that right? And were previously approved under that 2011 version of the reg for year-round use?
Yes, 16, they have frost-free faucets, which means the water is protected so they can have the water. And just so that any of the board wants to know, because maybe some of them weren't on the board back then, these are for mainly contractors. There's a lot of guys doing pipelines or working in the area that are transient. They might stay 3-4 months, or so they crash in a camper. They work 14, 16 hours a day. And we have, 6 or 7 of those people that come every winter. So it's really not based for any families. We don't allow children. It's simply for people that might be in the area. We did have 16 sites. I don't see it being more. I have no problem in designating those 16 because we just wanted an ability to generate some income throughout the winter as well.
So this regulation, as again, we're picking, instead of, why recreate the wheel, right? We had something in the past that was a framework. So let's start from that. So this was again, drawing back something that was in existence in 2011 that had to do with the winterized sites. 16 have been approved. And moving forward, if any additional were requested, they would meet these regulations and require a special permit from you before they could be used. Okay. So moving on.
I'm sorry, Dory, let me add to that. So what we do at the campground, and Dory's better at this than I am as far as the regs are concerned. We have what's called a landlord-tenant agreement that we had our attorneys draw up. So if anyone signs it and I need to get rid of them, they don't have housing rights, squatters' rights, or whatever we want to say. It's a non-landlord tenant. They sign it. If I ask them to leave, if they were, let's say, to bring a child that wanted to send them to school, I can ask them to leave the next day, and I've gotten the police involved and they come and take them out. So, it's more concerning for me, not what zoning says, but what my legal rights are to ensure that we have no desire to send anyone to school or have anyone live there or riffraff or trash or anything like that. This is simply about having people a place to stay that they can crash and go back to work. So, I mean, that's our intent, and that's how we get around it, is we just say this is a non-landlord tenant agreement, and that covers us. So,
Yeah, Brian, these winter residents that you mentioned that are people that are working in the area, they're subletting from the summer residents of these properties.
there's no subletting. I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, do these same people that are there in the winter also own the same campsites to be there in the summer?
No, these are different individuals. The ones we have in the summer, is it's kind of described in these zoning regs from April to November, are just seasonal campers, people that use it as a summer home, so to speak. And then they all move out because all the water gets blown out and they don't have anywhere, have any water to bathrooms. So these particular gentlemen will come in, in the fall time, and they'll spend through the winter. I mean, they may hang on with me an extra month or two in the spring, but they're in and out 6-month contracts. And so they'll work on the pipeline, like I said, or we have some guys working on electrical lines, or when we have storm damage out here, those guys will come up from New Jersey and they need a place to stay. They'll bring a motorhome, and a few of them will crash in there. So that's really, there's not, no, they're not here year round.
And those are separately designated sites for winter use, and each person who uses one signs their own use agreement or license agreement in order to rent it for whatever duration they need to use it over those winter months. And it's separate and apart from any summer rental that happens for that or other units.
It is, and these sites are specifically 16. That's why I know, because they're frost free. So those, if anyone, the pipes go 5 feet in the ground so that the water is protected at nighttime, so they can send the water back into the ground. And then when they need it, they'll come out and they'll put their hoses on. So the rest of the campground is blown out. So there's no water to those sites. So we have 16. We found that to be a good number over the years. We've never gotten anywhere close to that, but that's what's installed. So that's kind of what we use as a reference, is the 16.
And I don't mean to make this a stupid question or anything. I just want to be clear that there really is no year-round lease agreement or ownership or sublet or whatever you want to call it. You continue to own these sites. I mean, it's nothing.
It's a good point, Jeff. I mean, because a lot of campgrounds have gone into selling their sites, which we don't do. And that you lose some control in that factor. And also our contracts are from April to November, and then they're renewed annually. So I don't mean to how this sounds, but if I don't like them or I don't want them to come back, we just don't renew them. So we have a lot of control in that respect. And then as far as year-round, we don't sign year-round leases. It's just April to November. These sites are strictly for transients. Last year I think we only had 4 with COVID. There wasn't a lot of traveling. We might have upwards of 10. So we plow the roads for them. They have their own bathrooms. We don't provide those. So like I said, they go to work 14 hours a day. They come crash and do it all over again.
No, that's fine. Sorry to belabor a point. Thank you.
Please, for everybody, please feel free to chime in as we go through. There is a lot of information here, and it helps to talk about them as we go through them, as opposed to saving your questions for the end. I have no problem with that. I really want this to be a collaboration, because I think for it to work, it's got to work for us and it's got to work for you. Again, we've drafted something that we think will do that, because we've really drawn a lot on your history and what you have historically allowed here. So we're trying not to push the envelope really, and just kind of resurrect what you had in the past, making some changes and just some wording changes that make it read better, or that make it a little, I think, more consistent with the public health code, things like that. Along the lines of really, belt and suspenders, let's be really sure that there's going to be no one claiming residency because of this. In section B3, we have a provision that was also in the prior regs that says, if the operator of the campground at any time becomes aware that an occupant is trying to establish residency, they will take immediate steps to terminate their rights to continue to stay and use that site. So I think we've covered it every which way to Sunday, that if somebody tries to claim occupancy, not only are they not able to under the zoning regs, but we have the right to throw them out just on that basis alone. And then you still also have the public health code that really says any campground is only temporary living. It's not a permanent living space. So I think you got all that hopefully covers those concerns.
Dora, you're referencing previous iterations of the land use regulations. this might be a question for Mike. I'm not sure if you've got access to that, or maybe Dory, you have more access to that. Some of the things that you're talking about predate my time on the commission. It would be helpful if we had a copy of the documents that you were using to make the modifications to, so we could understand the incremental changes you've made to those.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sorry to jump in here. You probably have all this documentation because I think I probably got it from you at some point. But there's two real sets of documents that I was drawing from. One was a version of the regulations that was in effect, I want to say around 2001. So right before the 2004 change where they got rid of, no, that couldn't, let me just think, hold on. Yeah, on this, my notes say 2001-ish. So it was before the 2004 change where they got rid of all campgrounds. And that's the one. And if Mike, you don't have it handy, I will email it to you tomorrow morning. That's the one that had the provision that says there's no new campgrounds. You can only have, you can only get a special permit for additions to existing campgrounds. And most of what I took for this draft regulation is from there. And then there's the 2000, I want to say 11 version that was it's just that one amendment that allowed for the approval of the winterized sites. So I could email all of that to Mike in the morning if you want to see a full copy of where this all came from.
I have that in front of me, Mr. Williams. Those regs were passed on. I was on the zoning board myself for 8 years, way back when. And so the general regs that Dory's referring to were in existence for, I think they were created in 1974 when my father first started, and they didn't change much after that besides the amendment to the amount of time that we could be open. So they're pretty short and then they're accessible. Mike can get them to you. Nothing has changed all that much. So sometimes there's some things that talk about square footage of campers and things over the years, but pretty much they're basically the same. So Dory and also Dory, I don't know if you were getting to this, but she also pulled some from other towns that we thought were helpful.
I did, yeah. So a few, I gotta tell you though, the vast majority, 90% of what's in this is from prior versions of Ashford regs. They were really the most comprehensive out of the ones we saw. But for Willington had some regulations and that were fairly comprehensive as well. And we picked and chose one or two little provisions from there. I think actually the noise provision and maybe the lighting provision might have been from there. But other than that, I think it wasn't all that different. So yes, so we will certainly circulate those to Mike and make them available so you can see with your own eyes, kind of compare the two. But basically the section B2 which has to do with the winterized site, was really from the 2011 amendment. B3, I think, was from the 2011 amendment. Paragraph C here, which has to do with records, that was always in there. So that's probably from the prior version, which we'll get you. And really, it's almost redundant to say it, but it doesn't hurt to say it, because the public health code requires us, and the public health code, let me back up, will apply whether we say it applies or not. The public health code really dictates what can and can't be done on a family campground. It dictates, the design standards and all of that as well. And it requires a lot of this record keeping. So we added it here that these records have to be kept for anyone who comes in to use a campsite. You have to have name and address, their arrival and departure dates, which campsite you're assigning to them, and information about the car that they're bringing to the site. We'll keep a log, and we always have, and it was part of the old regulations, it's part of the health code, and we just figured it makes sense to just say it again here. So there's no question.
Yeah, Dory, one of the things we took out of the land use regulations and our most recent revision is restating state regulations. If there is a state regulation that applies to something, we felt it better to cite the section in code of where the state regulation is, rather than restating it in our own. That way, whatever changes on the state would be kept current and we wouldn't be restating it. So I would encourage you to do the same.
If you, yeah, you know what, that's totally fine. This was, like I said, more of a belt and suspenders, but I understand the concern there is you don't want an inconsistency with something else that's controlling. So if something changes in the code, you don't want to have to keep revising your regulations in order to incorporate that change. This has been a fairly consistent provision throughout, so I don't think there's much chance of it changing, but if you would rather just have us revise that to say that we will keep, in addition to the information that we need to have in the prior section to make sure that they have a permanent residence elsewhere, all other records will be as per required by the health code. I'm happy to make changes, you know, as we go through. So we'll note that, and then we can have a discussion and see if everyone feels the same way. And I'm happy to play around with the language of this.
Yeah, like for instance, our previous regulations cited what we thought should be done on group homes, whereas the group homes are regulated on a state level, not on a town level. So I would apply the same thing here.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Okay. So now getting into paragraph D, which are design requirements. The first one there having to do with the buffer strip is based again largely on your prior version of the regulations. It does require a buffer strip both for visual and auditory screening. And normally the strip, it says, would be between 200 or would be 200 feet wide along a highway or 100 feet wide along land under other ownership. But in cases where topography or vegetation exists that it's not necessary, you can reduce the width, and we say to not less than 50. Your prior version of the regulations require the 200 feet. It said normally 200 feet. And then it said the part about based on topography, et cetera, you could reduce the width, but they never put a minimum in there. I guess we just threw in the 50s, so you never thought, and neighbors, if they ever, you know, were concerned about this, never thought we were right on top of them with campsites. So that was just a little more stringent, perhaps, than what your prior regulations allowed, because you had an unfettered discretion to change that based on topography and vegetation. So no, there will be no campsites within the buffer strips, but you can use the buffer strips for recreational and parking areas as long as it's adequately landscaped. And that was from your prior regulations as well. Number 3 here is, it says a campsite shall be of such size and character as to comply with all applicable state and local regulations. So the public health code is specific about what kind of area you need for each campsite that the health department will approve. And remember, the health department under the public health code has to approve. First of all, you have to register your campground annually with the health department, and they have to do an inspection and improve you every year. So the health department's really the controlling, not to say, I don't mean to diminish your authority at all, but it's really the controlling aspect here is, do we comply with the health code? Because if we don't, there's no way you're going to be in operation. They really oversee most of the details having to do with the operation and design of the campground.
I think it's actually one step further, Dory, because the state will regulate, let's say, sewage systems, and the locals come in on an annual basis. So the locals will inspect the bathrooms, snack bar when we had it, the pool, splash pads. Each site has to have a vacuum breaker. It's a full day process. They'll come in, they check our dumping stations. We have to have backflows on the water flows at the dumping stations. It's a rather lengthy list that she comes in every year, Lynette does. And then the state does as well. So the state will come in and monitor our wells. The state comes in, monitors the ponds. I know that you might find this hard to believe, but I have to pull 27 permits in order to operate this campground, including a scale for our propane tanks. And so, I mean, it's rather extensive. So Dory's right. I mean, it's Eastern that comes in. We have a good relationship with them. They came out during COVID and, you know, had us do all those signage that they wanted and felt comfortable with. So they are out often. We probably see them a few times a year. And we have to have water tests submitted to them as well as to the state. So it's much more involved than just, like, you know, to pass these regs and then you know, zoning doesn't have any more control. It's really just not that way. It's just there's a lot of agencies that have their hands in a lot of stuff that we do.
Thanks, Brian. Moving on to criteria number 4, it states that each campsite may be occupied by one recreational vehicle as defined in the state's regulations, or 2 tents, and shall be used obviously by the occupants registered to use that campsite. Now, this isn't in the public health code. I believe, I have to go back and double check, but I believe this was from a prior regulation as well. I think the concern there is the public health code just says a camping unit site, which is, one campsite, is an area set aside for a camping unit. It doesn't say how many camping units you could have on there. I'm not sure if it's implied that it should only be one, but it's not very clear on that. And I think maybe the concern that you may have had historically and why that regulation was there is because you don't want to cram it full of too much stuff. You don't want one campsite to be overflowing with maybe 20 people using it because you have 5 tents and an RV and a trailer and then another 2 tents or whatever. So we put some limits on here so that each campsite can only have one recreational vehicle or 2 tents. And a recreational vehicle, just so you know, is defined in the regulations as being either a camping trailer, a 5th wheel trailer, a motor home, travel trailers, or truck trailers. So it's really kind of an all-encompassing. So you can have one of those or 2 tents. So it's not too jam-packed.
Or 2 tents?
2 tents, yep. Okay. And number 5 is from your prior regulations, and it just has to do with the roadway widths serving the site. Now, again, what's there is blessed and non-conforming. This is if there's ever an expansion. But I figured if there's an expansion, let's make it consistent with what was required before and what's there. So I just copied that over and added this here for travel widths for 1- and 2-way traffic and potential need for a turnaround if it's a longer road.
Yeah, Dory, it's not really a good idea to repeat the same thing that is already in part of the regulations.
Well, it used to be in the regulations, remember?
No, there is a separate section within 4B that talks about driveways and the requirements for turnarounds and widths. So
you know what, then thank you for calling that to my attention. I should check that and make sure it's consistent with this. And if it is, then take it out. I'm just concerned that if it's not consistent with it, and for some reason there was ever a difference, perhaps that we'd want to evaluate that. But what section did you say it was again? And I'll look at it.
I don't have the section in front of me, but if you go through section 4B, there is a separate section concerning driveways and fire turnarounds. And I would recommend that you would refer back to that rather than restating it.
Okay, thank you.
4B, it's
Section 6.
subsection 7, I think.
Section 7.
Hold on. The only
Yeah.
thing that I'm wondering is, because these are not town roads, they're not roads that we have jurisdiction over, they're not rights of way, they're really just access within the campground, I would imagine. And so the standards by which you would maintain a road in a campground is not the same as what we would have for a town road. So there may be, I mean, the ones that we have, Article 4B, Section 7, probably subsection B within that for driveway widths and lengths are far more expansive than what you're probably dealing with here. But we can review that.
And actually, I think it's a good point, Mike, because the speed of our traffic and is much different than town. I don't know what the section, I'm trying to look it up myself, but quite honestly, I mean, none of this stuff, it's just for purposes of the regs, I think. I mean, most of the, it's like the market dictates. If we have tiny roads and people have some safety issues, then we're gonna have issues. So I mean, if it makes, whatever makes everybody happy on it, it's like, you know, in the fire department comes in annually and we discuss our dry hydrants that we have and make sure we have some clear roads. And if there are turnarounds, and we deal with that with the chief quite a bit to make sure that we're safe, because we do have some incidences. So most of our roads are much wider than this anyway. So what everyone's comfortable with, I think this is just semantical. Maybe for beyond the next person that takes over my seat, maybe it's good for them, but it's not really too relevant for.
I will note, I'm looking at it right now and assuming I'm looking at the right version of the most updated version of your regs, which I think it is. The regulation for width of driveway, it doesn't specify if it's a one-way or two-way. Well, I guess if it's a driveway, in most instances, when it's a residential driveway, it's going to be one way, right? So it's just a driveway to that house. And that's how your regulation reads. It talks about driveways serving a single family dwelling or two dwellings or a two-family dwelling. It doesn't really contemplate this scenario, or maybe even a condo or other type of a scenario, not that this is what it is. So it's kind of specific to single and two-family dwellings. It doesn't contemplate more of an internal driveway system here where you may have two-way traffic. So I'm not sure, Commissioner Williams, if that's really the one that would apply, but I'm happy to talk to Mike offline about it and discuss what makes the most practical sense here. And then we can always tweak it if necessary.
My comment is just make sure it's, in, I'm searching for the right word, that it's not in conflict with what's already there for the driveway. So
Okay.
if it is something above and beyond that, just refer back to the driveway that, because this is a campground, it has two-way, therefore it has this above and beyond what is in the driveway regulation.
Okay. All right, I think I understand your comment, and I'll follow up with Mike D'Amato about that, and we can look into it further. Paragraph 6 here now says, I'm sorry, was someone else speaking? Okay. Paragraph 6 here now, this is, I think, exactly what Commissioner Williams is getting to. Rather than restating what might be stated elsewhere, I said here, which is a little different than prior versions, because in prior versions of the regs, you did restate a lot. Here I'm saying that a campground, and again, anything that's governed by this regulation, which is additions, expansions, enlargements, things like that, will comply with all applicable state and local regulations regarding fire safety. So that's going to be the fire code and any local fire ordinances you have. Provisions for electrical services, water supply, sanitary facilities, subsurface sewage disposal facilities, sanitary disposal stations, and general sanitation measures. The reason I said that again is because when I look through the public health code, it's very comprehensive as to what you have to do to meet those criteria, or the regulations for the public health code. So I didn't want to start, regurgitating 3 pages worth of design details when we can just make a simple reference. And then I also didn't want to use some of what was in your prior regulations, which might be in conflict with some of that. So I just said, listen, if there's any expansion, all of these components have to deal and comply with all applicable codes and regulations. And I just thought that was the cleanest way to handle that. Subsection E deals with noise. And candidly, I can't recall if that was in your prior version of the regulations or not, but if it wasn't, it seemed appropriate. Actually, I think I took that from Wellington. Here, I just wanted it to be clear that any expansion, additional sites, whatever, they have to have some noise controls. And I think I heard you say at the beginning of the hearing in your minutes, you're talking about adopting some noise ordinances, which I'm not sure you have in place right now. So, that may come into play. But here it's just a general statement that the premises will be designed and used to avoid nuisance level noise, basically. We don't want to be a nuisance to the neighbors. We don't want a nuisance to come either from using the campsites or from, if we have a public address system and we're making announcements, oh, it's quiet time, oh, lights off soon, blah, blah, blah. We don't want it to be too loud of levels there. If we have a band come in for entertainment for our campers who are staying there, we don't want to be a bad neighbor there either. So it's just a general nuisance noise provision that says that it needs to be controlled. So it's not a nuisance, it's not excessive, and it's not objectionable.
Brian, I saw a thing you put on the Facebook page, Ashford Community Connections, relative to the noise. And as you I'm more than aware. There's been a lot of the neighbors making complaints. You indicated that because you had the main rec building closed and were using a tent, that was making the noise greater than it would have been otherwise. Is that going to be going away soon?
Oh, so many comments. Yes, your assumption is correct. So 47 years we've been doing this. So the neighbors that complained, and there were some on the page, or were set straight, I guess, by the other neighbors that appreciate us. So to create our, I'm not saying you're trying to do this, Mr. Williams, that there's a bunch of neighbors that are complaining is just not correct. But we do address them. We call them all individually. We actually had an open house this past weekend. We do have our building down. It's outside. The leaves came in late this year. So we did make arrangements with Mike last year to stop at 10 o'clock as opposed to 10:30. I live right next door to the campground. As I sit here now, if I can hear it in my house, I will call and have security turn it down. So we are more than willing to work with the neighbors. They have my direct phone number. They will call if they think it's too loud. Some bands get carried away. So, as Dory's mentioning, we're just trying to work with them. We have a business to run. People want to be entertained, but on the other hand, we're not trying to be unreasonable. So nobody came to the open house, but we will have it again and see if anyone wants to come out and see exactly. I think in the video you saw, they're playing under a tent, so the noise isn't going to go anywhere. The next building is already designed, and we have some soundproof barriers. They're going to play outside, but it'll be encased with some soundproof material so that it'll keep the sound closer. And what happened before, Mr. Williams, was they play in the other building and it would bounce off the office, the two of them, and stay there. This noise would stay there, but now it just seems to echo out into the woods, and it's creating a little bit of an issue, but we'll work with it.
Yeah, I can appreciate the fact that sound travels. I live 2.7 miles from I-84, and depending upon how things are going, sometimes I can hear the trailer trucks like they're in my backyard.
Well, who do you call when you can hear the tractor trailer trucks? I mean, do you have someone?
Well, it is encouraging to know that Ryan is right there on the or next to the premises. He's the eyes and ears, and he's got a vested interest to make sure that his campground runs properly and operates well without too much complaint, because the more complaints we have from neighbors that go unaddressed, the more problems we're going to have with the town, and it's just not good for anybody. So I'm glad that they have his personal number, and he gets in touch with each and every one who might make a complaint and addresses it right there on the spot. I think that's great. Just spiraling in from noise to light again, that's just a general provision that says, let's make sure that any lighting that gets put up there hereafter is going to be make sure that there's going to be no glare and illumination off premises, because as much as these neighbors don't want to have a lot of noise, they also don't want to have light shining on the premises all night. So I get it, and we just built that into the regulation as well. And again, I think those two may have stemmed from Willington, but I'll double check that, and I can let Mike know so he can let you guys know.
Yeah, Dory, in the same vein, there are light pollution comments within the current land use regulations.
Oh yeah, okay, I'll check that. I will. So perhaps what you're saying is perhaps we don't even need that section because it might be covered elsewhere. Right?
Yep.
Okay, I will make a note. So that's really the guts of what we're trying to accomplish. Again, I don't think it's a novel idea. It's something that you had in your regulations up until 2014. And I'm not sure if it was purposely or inadvertently that when the deletion of all reference to campgrounds went away, that went away too. It might have just been an oversight. I don't recall, and I don't know. So I think this is just getting us back to a date and time where I hope you recognize back then, as well as you hopefully do now, that this is a legitimate, valid, valuable business, just like any other business in town. And to hamstring it so that it can't grow and expand under any circumstances just seems somewhat unreasonable, especially when your plan of conservation and development recognizes that they're one of the top paying taxpayers year after year, that it's good to encourage and retain existing businesses and allow them opportunities to grow. It's good to increase the tax base. So with all of that in mind, we think that as long as there's control, so you have oversight of, as to how any expansion or enlargement happens, and you have that oversight via public hearing process where there's also neighborhood input, then I'm hoping that it's a win-win and we can make it work for everybody. So we'd like you to entertain this, and it is, like I said, a work in progress. So we're happy to evaluate your comments that you made tonight, work with Mike a little bit more on some refinements where you think it's necessary, check and make sure there's no conflicts in other regulations, or if there's another regulation that covers it, so there's no redundancy, take that out. We're happy to do that. And I just love some general feedback from you guys as to, yep, we're on the right path, and you see this is the way forward, or if there's some glaring concerns that we need to be aware of, I would love to know that as well. Although I hope there aren't.
Jeff, are there comments from the public here?
Well, we need to open that up. Dory, you're all set except for.
I'm good for now. Yes, I'm available for questions and clarifications. Yep.
Right.
I have a question.
I think the only, hold on, Janet, just 1 second. I think Erwin is the only for the public I see out there. I don't know if he has anything. Okay, interrupt us later, Erwin, if you missed your chance. Janet, go right ahead.
I don't know what the state regulations are, but I assume that they have minimum size requirements for each campsite.
They do.
Right, okay. So my concern is if you decide, or a future owner decides to build some buildings that aren't campsites, they'd have to meet, I don't know how to say this. Do we have any regulations that would state how far they have to be from other buildings, or how we would regulate that? Say some future owner wants to pack in as much as he can we stop that by these regulations?
When you say buildings, Janet, what's the nature of the buildings you're talking about?
Well, not campsite buildings, but recreation buildings, or say somebody wants to build a bunch of dining halls and take up all this space, or, I mean, what control do we have over what type of buildings go in there and how closely packed they can be, is my question.
Well, that comes under the special permit activity and review. Again, we'd have to have a special permit application for any such changes, new buildings, changes in the footprint of buildings, anything like that. And then the hearing on top of that, and the opportunity to review what is going on and accepting or denying the special permit.
But if our regulations don't state they can't do something, we can't really deny the special permit. Isn't that correct?
Well, you still do have the opportunity to make a finding as part of any special permit that there's no threat to public health, safety, or welfare. If you felt that these buildings potentially to be located in the future were just too dense, too close, there could be a fire hazard from, spark going from one to the other. And that might even be covered in the fire or building code, actually. But if you felt for some reason it was just too dense, and that you needed to lighten that up a bit, I think under your general findings that you have to make for a special permit, which is compatibility with the neighborhood, sound development of the neighborhood, and general concerns about public health, safety, and welfare, I would imagine there's something in there that you can hang your hat on that says you got to move some of these buildings so that they're spaced further.
Yeah, Janet, the special permit process gives planning and zoning quite a bit of leeway to look at all aspects of the application. So if there's something about all the things you just mentioned that's of concern, we could raise that. We could state on the permit that they would have to either change what they're doing, or we could deny it.
And it also allows us the opportunity, you know, when you say packing it in kind of infers that it's not being done in a proper format. And in doing so, we enlist Eastern Highlands, we enlist fire code, we enlist all the items that doesn't stop this group from building those items and putting them in, but potentially doesn't stop them, but make sure they're doing it in a proper fashion that both allows the business to grow for that activity, but does it in a safe and proper environment for that usage.
You know,
I
to
think
give
the-
an
The way-
example,
I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Ms. Bellamy, so right now we're non-conforming, so we can't do anything. So this is what now we're trying to get these regs passed, so will be a special permit. Special permit means we have to go back for everything, but we don't have the opportunity to go to the board and ask you now if we can do something because we're non-conforming. So that, and then after that, if you do agree and say, yes, we like this building, then I got to start with the state, which gets into, like Jeff is referencing, health codes, occupancy, fire. Mr. Whitehouse comes and checks our fire extinguishers. I mean, all those things, ADA, like Mr. Williams was talking about, like there's so many other things that when I pull the permit with Randy that he checks off the boxes. There's just a variety with electrical and plumbing. And so it's not just that they're randomly going up. You as a board get to decide if I can put the building up. If you say yay, then it's on to, you know, many other agencies to make sure that we comply with all the local and state regulations.
yeah, Janet, I would use as an example the discussion we had with the outdoor dining facility that the Midway asked for. They were expanding their existing building, and they're a existing commercial facility. If Brian were to expand his, I'm not sure the right word for it's not dining hall, it's
Recreation hall.
recreation hall. But if you had more of campsites and you needed more space in the recreation hall and you wanted to expand that, that would be similar to what the Midway was asking for expansion of their existing business.
I understand that. I was just concerned if some unscrupulous owner wanted to do things that we didn't like, did we have the legal authority, you know, to stop it without risking, you know, big lawsuits or problems?
Honestly, Janet, not to belittle your point, because I do fully understand your point. I'm just saying if they were unscrupulous, they probably wouldn't be coming to us anyways.
Good point. I think that what I had said was the process is it's the zoning board first. I mean, so you guys choose. Once you choose whether it's, you know, dislike is something, whether that's kind of a weird word, but I mean, whether it's applicable or he wants to build or someone wants to build like a cow farm or something, like it all has to go. That's what special permit means. Anytime I've done anything, I've had to come before the board. I'm very familiar with this board. I visited so much, I joined it for 8 years. So, you know, so that to answer your question is, yeah, we would have to come before the board.
And if I could just chime in real quick, under your existing special permit criteria for review, Commissioner Bellamy, you'll find this one mostly pertinent, is Article 5C, Section 3, Number 2. And it has to do with the relation of buildings to the environment. And it says the proposed project or development shall be related harmoniously to the terrain and to the use, the scale and siting of existing buildings in the vicinity of the site. All buildings and other structures shall be sited to minimize disruption to the topography. Strict attention shall be given to the proper functional, visual, and spatial relationships of all buildings, structures, landscaped elements, and paved areas. So I think that gives you exactly the legal authority to review those things on a case-by-case special permit application basis. And if you don't find something to your liking, make whatever recommendations you consider necessary.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
I have a question.
Yes, Nord.
For Dory or Brian. I keep hearing the same word being used over and over again, growth. And I equate the growth with expansion. Does this mean that you're planning on expanding the number of campsites?
Absolutely.
What's
Okay,
that?
he said
So-
absolutely.
I said absolutely.
Yeah.
At some point, sure. I mean, yeah, that's this didn't start from that. This whole issue started, and Mike want to give history, but maybe not. No one's quite sure why the regs were omitted from the 2014 regs. We don't know. Mike went back. I know we went and looked at all the minutes and tried to couldn't find any reason why they weren't existing anymore. So we wouldn't be here if those regs still existed. And now we're trying to build a building and we can't because we're non-conforming. So this doesn't stem from campsites. This stems from a building that we had damage that we're trying to build that we're not allowed to do so. But I'm not going to lie to you and say that at some point in the future we're going to ask for more campsites. Of course, and I think it's relative. And I wrote some of these things down. Again, I've been dealing this for 30 years. Midway got bigger, Cumberland's got bigger, the firehouse got bigger, the town hall got bigger. Things get bigger. I mean, with your permission, of course, as the zoning board, we come and ask, but to think that we're not going to want to expand. When I started, there was 118 sites. Now there's 267. What number will that get to? I mean, I don't know. Market dictates, zoning board dictates. You guys will be able to tell us what you're comfortable with. But yeah, I think it's a natural progression.
Yeah, Brian, you own quite a bit of acreage, and a lot of that acreage is vacant, correct?
Yes, we have 140 acres here. I would say half of it is not developed at all, and nor do I plan it to be.
So, but within that 140, you could add additional campsites without impinging upon any of the neighbors.
I wouldn't even be close to the neighbors. The concern is, of course, the board's permission, but quite honestly, the state is much more tough than you guys would be. I mean, if I asked for sites and you gave them to me, it would just be beginning, because everything has to be septic. There's just a long process to go through. So, I mean, like I said, I don't want to lie to you and say that this is not about expanding. We probably will. We'll see how things go. But yeah, there is a lot of acreage. I bought this property from Mr. Lackman, and we shook hands and said, you're going to buy 70 acres, you're going to put one house on it, and that's all you're going to do. And that's all I've done, and that's all I plan to do. So.
And there's also restrictions in the regulations for the health code as to what again, for the campsites really based on acreage, how many you can have per acre, and it's got to be dry acreage. So there's a lot of acreage that might not be usable as well. So yeah, that all has to be taken into consideration. Then you have to build in your buffers and things like that. So yes, we fully expect at some point in the future to come back to you with some additional sites, but they'll have to be fully compliant with whatever the health code requires, whatever the state's going to require, and whatever wetlands and your board will end up requiring.
I can read that for you real quick from the state health department. It says the number of camping unit sites, I don't have glasses, shall be limited to not more than 15 per suitable acre, except for camping unit sites serving overnight or transient campers, where the density shall be limited to 25 camping units per site per suitable acre, I should say. So not only are there restrictions with the state as far as the number of sites you can put on per acre, but there's also how many bathroom facilities you need to have per person. And there's a scale that goes down through. So there's a lot of other parameters: water, pressure, length, how far you're away from your well. There's just a lot of other regulations, but yeah. So
septics and holding tanks and dumpster areas, and there's a lot of infrastructure, if you will, that's going to go along with creating additional campsites.
And Brian, I can't say, this is not predisposing any type of decision or anything along those lines, but obviously if I were in your shoes and I had purchased, or I owned a campground and my plan was to make it successful, expansion would be on my mind too. I mean, that's the nature of the biz. So I can appreciate you as a business owner, what you're looking to do and what you're trying to do. And again, I know we're just a stepping stone when it comes to the other regulations you have to face.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jeff.
Jeff, I would propose the following. There's a number of comments that we've made that I'm sure Dory has made ample notes for. I would ask that she go back and revise the submission for some of those comments and come back to us at the next meeting.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I just want to double check the date of the next meeting. Is that going to be
July 14th.
July 14th?
No, July
you're-
12th.
Oh, July
12th,
12th, sorry.
Yeah, yep.
Hey, Jeff.
I am available. Brian, are you available? July 12th?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I am, especially if it's virtual. Do you know if you're switching back to in person, or are we going to stay virtual?
I don't know at that time, but I have a close relationship with the first selectman and I'll find that out.
Okay.
But I don't think it's in the cards yet because we're dealing right now with the situation of what the state will recommend when it comes to in-person versus virtual or a hybrid of those.
Okay. So could I have 30 seconds?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so first of all, NJV stands for Nia, Jackson, and Vienna. Those are my 3 young children. I wanted to make that point. If anyone wanted to watch the audio from that video, I just said it is on our Ashford Facebook page. You can watch, or our Briley's page on Briley.com, because my daughter did that video. That's what she does for work. And I was really proud, and I get tears every time I watch it. So if you didn't see the video, if you didn't hear it, you should watch it because I really like it.
It is really nice video.
It is
I'm
good.
sorry that you couldn't get the audio on it. So
I didn't know I didn't
Person's
have the
great.
audio, but anyways, it's available if someone wants to see it. So the number actually is $173,000 in taxes. I think that's important. I've had Sid Oregon in the past, the chairman of the zoning board, say that you're a zoning board, not a tax board. And I understand that, but the campground, that property generates $173,000 between the campers and myself. I want to reiterate the town of Ashford plan of conservation and development. Their objective 1, I think, was designed by Mr. Jeff here. It says the objective 1 is proactively support the retention and expansion of existing businesses. And objective 2 says proactively seek economic development that provides needed goods and services, increases the tax base, and provides jobs. I think we just described that. I mean, we have a great tax base at the campground. We've been here a long time. So the board knows we can't use any services to the town. We can't use a transfer station. They don't plow or maintain our roads. We can't send children to school. We do employ 35 people. 15 of those are full-time. And 15 of those are Ashford residents, believe it or not. I did the math today. And then the rest of them are E.O. Smith, UConn Eastern students. We support a lot of the businesses. Midway, I can't go there anymore because half of it's campers. Ashford Spirit Horse Listeners, Buell's, Ashford Dairy Bar, and many odders. Donate to the fire department. I've been the Ashford Little League president for years. I've coached for the years on the PTO. I coached with Jeff. The food bank I donate to. I've lived here my entire life. I went to Ashford, EO, and UConn. We've been doing this for 47 years. I've been doing it for 30. And hopefully one day, one of my 4 children will take over for me, because that was a promise I made to my father. So I wanted to just, kind of introduce myself. I've been around. I kind of chose this setting because these are all my awards from when I played at UConn baseball and E.O. Smith. And so I've been around for a long time. I don't plan on going anywhere. I live right next to the campground. So it behooves me to keep it under control. Otherwise, I will suffer the consequences. And I understand everybody's concerns and want to hear them. And at some point, yes, we probably will come for some expansion. Right now, I'm just trying to get a building in before the winter and not have to pay such exorbitant lumber prices. So those are my main goals.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much for that. But I will just correct one thing, that at least 2 other members, it was a co-effort for POCD with Dick Williams and Alex Castillo on that POCD development. So, but thank you for that. At this time, if there's nothing further from either the board members or anything from Dory or Brian, what I would like to recommend is that we continue the public hearing until our next meeting on the, the 12th
yes.
of July. And we will also put the discussion under, I guess it would be, yeah, it'll be new business because we'll still be in a hearing period at that point for the meeting for finalization and adding that to our agenda. And Dory will come back with some recommendations for that hearing, or excuse me, some of the input regarding existing regs versus state statute and such that we've recommended. Michael will be providing us with some of the background historical information when it comes to the regs that were pre-existing and those that we've been referring to most of the night. So with your indulgence, Dory and Brian, we'll just continue the hearing until next month.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Yes, and thank you for all of your comments. That's gonna, I think, make next month's meeting that much easier because we're really gonna be able to spend some time working with Mike over the next few weeks to streamline this and revise it and come back with, I hope, a version that everyone can be comfortable and happy with. Thank
Mike,
you.
Mike, when does codification come into effect? Is it sometime in, oh, it's not till August, right?
Yeah, our part is done, but if.
I'm
but
saying,
we-
I'm saying access to it and having it up. I believe it's middle of August or something like that.
Yeah, I'll check to see if they get our stuff done. I can share it with the group early.
Okay, I was just trying to make it easier for Dory with the codification access. Okay, very good. Then at this point, we will close the public hearing. Thank you, Dory.
No, continue it.
I'm sorry,
not close
continue.
it.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. For this evening, we will stop the public hearing, but we will continue going into next month. And again, thank you for your input on the issue.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Good night.
good night.
Night.
Gotta be careful on your word choices around with this deal, I tell you. Okay, so moving on to, we'll reopen the meeting for Planning and Zoning Commission, going to bills. Alex, anything for bills?
No, I don't have any new bills.
Okay, anything for correspondence received?
We had the two papers about the, what you were going to talk about tonight, one that Dick
Yeah.
sent us.
We'll bring those up in the unfinished business on C.
Okay.
Okay,
That's it.
okay, so moving on to unfinished business. Let's start with the update on the Lake District regulations and the survey update. Mike, you were gonna provide some, I guess I don't know if it's, I guess it's final data or some final pieces, because the receipt has closed on that, obviously.
Yeah, so I sent out after the last meeting, the link to review the actual results. Excuse me. In looking at it, because some of the questions required the respondents to basically provide individual unique responses, there was not a really effective way for me to summarize it. And so the link went out, I can't remember, it would have been shortly after the meeting. But I did go through my notes and our discussion and what we talked about last meeting and what the survey said, and made some adjustments to the proposed regulation to try and move it in a direction that was not going to allow for the massive expansion, because I think that the sentiment that I took away from what we saw in the survey was that people were concerned about water quality. They wanted to allow for some minor improvements to homes, but that they didn't want the overall look and feel of the way things are today to change that drastically, which means we have to look at how we kind of manage that. So I'm going to try and share my screen and show you what I have modified in a way that is legible here. Okay.
No audio?
No audio this time,
Okay.
unless you'd like for me to sing what I've changed.
I don't
versus-
know. Do you want to sing it? Really?
You don't want me to.
All right. Calling your bluff. Go ahead.
So things that I've changed, part of what I did is I went through what Dick had mentioned, and kind of sent me in his markup. So what you'll see is the changes that are in yellow. We took away farm stands. It's probably not necessary in this area. Interior lots and places of worship, that was something that Dick had mentioned. I had included this because it is aligned with the residential section of the regs now. So I just pulled that over because I thought it's the same area existing today. So why would we have different uses? But for something like this, probably not that big of a deal. So I took those two out, or I'm proposing to take those two out. For the bulk table, I had originally included lot coverage and building coverage. Dick had suggested we transition to just total lot coverage, which includes everything. So I did that, and I modified the height to 2.5 stories and 25 feet, because there was a lot of discussion about views and properties going up quite high. So one thing that I need to do a little bit more analysis on, and I'm trying to figure out the best way, I'm still got to look at it, but one of the numbers that we have to really think about is the maximum lot coverage. 10%, whether or not that's too high or too low, is something that we need to think about. And actually something that I didn't include in yellow, but as a follow-up to that, if you look number 5 here, what I've added is a special permit use, which is for residential lots with a total lot coverage between 10% and 30% in accordance with 6D section 6, which is our stormwater regulations. What this means is that if something comes up where somebody has, let's say, they want to perform some type of addition, or they want to increase their total lot coverage, they can come before the commission for a special permit to go beyond 10, but not more than 30. And again, the 30 is just a number that I chose based on kind of looking at some of the smaller lots. And Article 6D, Section 6 is the stormwater regulation. So basically, if they get an engineer to add stormwater infiltration, if they have like an on-site treatment of runoff through either low impact development or other stormwater standards, if they can demonstrate to you that they are not going to generate any new runoff because they have some type of drainage and engineering that they have performed, and they want to do all those calculations and submit a site plan, I think we should create a provision to allow them to do that, because we don't know, given the sheer number of lots, we don't know how many parcels, that the 10% may create issues for. And I don't want to just have another reason for someone to go to the ZBA. The other thing that this does is this creates a path for somebody to get a special permit if perhaps they're existing at 15%. If we create the 10% threshold now and they're at 15%, they're pre-existing non-conforming, and we're going to send everybody to ZBA for variances to the total lot coverage. This creates a pathway for them to do that, but the caveat is they have to demonstrate that they've engineered the site with all the stormwater stuff so that there is a real emphasis on water quality.
And Mike,
So
just Dick, if you look at and I'm going to base this primarily on Lake Chaffee, not on Ashford Lake, there's really limited ability to mitigate runoff because most of the properties are uphill of the lake. So whatever comes down from the property is going to flow down into the lake. I would change what you've got there. Instead of saying 10% and 30%, I would say 10% or greater. And so it doesn't put an upper limit because 30% might be too large. So if they want to do something different, they can come back to us and ask for a variance. But to put it there that this could be done, I think is opening the door.
So there are a couple of things. One, if we don't have a cap, then we're essentially giving you guys quasi zoning board of appeals powers. And that's where we get into the Varillo zoning board of appeals case where you guys are essentially granting waivers. So we have to add a cap so that everybody is clear that they can ask for that. That's similar to saying you guys had the regulations before, which said small additions could go to the ZEO and big additions had to go to the commission. We have to add that cap. The other thing is that nowadays there are many stormwater solutions which are all retained on site. There are Cultec stormwater infiltrators, which are essentially small septic systems specifically for runoff, which are in the ground. The roof leaders and driveway, everything is designed specifically for that. A lot of towns, particularly in Hartford County, I've worked in a couple, have zero runoff regulations, which means you need to design the site so that no runoff leaves the property. You can catch, hold, and clean all the runoff generated by your project. So I think that that can be demonstrated if somebody really needs to. But one of the things that has come up previously, and I had a conversation with Lynette about some of these things. This could come up if somebody simply wanted to pave their driveway. If they have a stone driveway and they want to move to the property year round and they decide they want to pave it to have it plowed, that could kick them over the 10% just from that. So we want to have a process, but I think we need to keep the cap.
I think 30% is high. I would consider going lower than that if you want to cap.
Well, can I just say, I think if you're requiring people to show that they've got some kind of an engineered system to control the runoff, I'm sure a lot of these small lots are going to have a hard time being under 30% if they want to do anything. So I think we'd be protected if you say you have to show us what you're doing with your runoff.
I was really, what I don't want to do is create a $5,000 cost to anybody who wants to do anything on their property, because we require the stormwater calculations and we require all these things for every single project. So I was trying to create a sort of a separation between things that are appropriate. But then if there are people that decide they want to add a detached garage or they want to do a bigger project, then I think it's appropriate for the commission to say, okay, well, we're going to make you show us that you've engineered it correctly. But I didn't want to create a burden for people. And so I want to show you one more thing, and then I'll stop talking. And I'm back and forth on a couple of different ways to do this, but I was reading through some regulations, and I have these things called obstructions in yards and projections. And so we have two things, and really the intent, I think, is more important than the language. We can talk about the language, but minor projections, which are basically gutters and chimneys and bay windows and door frames, things like that, which we don't want to include within the front yard or side yard setbacks. That's a very common way of creating allowing these obstructions for various things. If somebody adds a chimney or they want to rebuild something, or add bay window gutters, these things don't need to meet the setbacks. And then number two, which is a little bit different, and I created this based on the idea of a veranda line. So a lot of towns will have a veranda line which allow for open porches and other things to be added beyond the setback. So I kind of pivoted from that and created this category called major projections, which could include an access landing and stairs or uncovered deck. And I'm suggesting that can project 5 feet into the rear yard setback. The purpose of this is to facilitate access and allow for people to add small decks onto the property, because that's most of what people want to do. And we're allowing it to project 5 feet into the rear yard setback, which if you look above is at 20 feet. And again, we can adjust some of that, so that it can't be a porch, it can't have a roof, it's never going to be finished. It's just to have a deck, but allowing a little bit of a projection so that if you have some of these houses that are on the smaller lots, they can add a deck, which I think is reasonable, to a limited standard without having, again, to go to the ZBA, because if you look at all the ZBA variances that have gone before the commission, for anything related to the lake, from as far back as I look, they've historically been approved, because I think we all know these lots are so small. So I'm trying to create a process by which people can get some stuff, but the ZBA has some regulation to say, no, the regs allow you to have a small projection here. You don't have this case to ask for a 15-foot projection because they've already created a regulation for it. I'm trying to give them some coverage so that they have more to go on. And so I'm open to discussion for how you want to regulate that, or if you hate it and want me to remove it. But I will stop there.
Yeah, Mike, I'll remove my objection to that and state that we should have a upper cap, maybe ratchet it down to 25 instead of 30, but having it there, I think, makes sense.
And the 25 I was thinking about too, because if we're putting 10 in as on the table and then offering up this, as you said, kind of a stepping stone before going to the ZBA board of special permit for us to look at special circumstance and all that without having to grant a variance because it falls within this range. Then if they've got, as you said, if they've got 15% already, and we offer them that additional 10% that's in the table, that puts them at 25% as a max. I think that's a good level there. A slight change, but I think it's a good level with that without offering up too much going beyond that.
The only other thing that I wanted to mention is I'm adding a note to clarify that the front yard setback will be specifically defined as the portion of the property that is bounded by a road. Because I know that there can be arguments about what the front of the property is. Some people tell you it's what faces the lake. Some people tell you it's what faces the road. And I want to be very clear so that we're not arguing because our front yard setback is greater than the rear yard. So we're making that very clear. The other thing that I'm adding is for the front yard setback, talking about the contextual standard. And there's a couple of different ways to do this, but and the town of Lebanon, which has lakes as well, they basically add in or they have a qualifier which basically says that the setback is from the center line of the road. They recognize that some of these roads are narrow, some of them are not town roads, some of them are like cart paths that are 100 years old, and so finding the property lines is really complicated. So they went and basically said it's going to be this, and it's measured from the center point of the road. So that's an option that we can talk about if that's intriguing to you, and I can give you some language.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. And by the way, Lebanon is an order of magnitude more restrictive than anything we're thinking about here.
It's interesting you bring that up, Mike, because I was thinking about both the recognized major roads over by Lake Chafee and then those, for lack of a better term, access roads that lead over to other, there are multiple homes down. I guess we recognize it as a road. I'm not quite sure, but I don't think this town does much with it, or whatever its access is, whatever its nature is, as you said, whether it's a private road, a goat path, whatever. So yeah, that would be an interesting approach to going to that middle of whatever access road you drive down or you travel down.
Yeah, Mike, have you had any more communications with the Lake Chafee Association or Ashford Lake Association?
Not following disbursement of the survey. I had reached out while the survey was open because we were getting ready to put something in the Citizen to, I think is his first name Mike
Panic?
Yeah, I had emailed him and basically said, we want to include some other stuff and some photos and things as part of this. Do you have anything you want to share? And I asked a couple of questions and I never heard back from him. So nothing as of yet. I think that once we get to the point of the commission being comfortable with where we are with the reg, we can probably send it to them either for comment, or we can sort of formally invite them if we want to have them participate in the meeting, if that's what you would prefer, because it's certainly important that they take a look at it. There was one other thing that I've heard a couple of people mention, and I've seen it in people have called me and said I was told this previously, and it was mentioned in I think maybe Dick included it in an email. Or so talking about non-conforming lots and existing lots and building on lots. There are many lots which are existing lots of record that are not built on in these areas, and because they exist as part of the original subdivision, even though they're non-conforming, they're still viable building lots. I just want to make that clear that no matter what we pass here, which is why you'll see lot frontage and some of this stuff being NA, the initial subdivisions which were approved many years ago, And if you look in the agenda folder for I have the Lake Chaffee and the Ashford Lake overall maps, there are hundreds of lots. It is very likely that there will be new homes built on existing very small lots in some of these areas. I just wanted to sort of point that out.
Yeah, Mike, I think looking back over time, people have been buying up some of these lots that are vacant with the idea of building houses on them. And we've basically said they couldn't do that. Am I correct on that?
No. All right, let's pick Lake Chaffee, for example. I'm going to share my screen. So this is the overall map.
Oh my God.
So that is the subdivision map that was approved in May of 1950 for Lake Chaffee. When this map was recorded in the town clerk's office, and I will zoom in here whenever it was, in May, every single one of those lots is and was a building lot. What you'll see, and I'll hopefully not make you car sick here, but what you'll see is that most of these lots are 50 feet wide. Some of them are bigger in the corners. So a lot of these lots were purchased, 2 and 3 at a time, and are now, one lot, but many of them are not. So they have protection as a building lot under the Connecticut General Statutes and can be built on, provided they can demonstrate to me that they have not done anything to make the lots smaller. If they have kept them the same size or made them larger than their building lots. So the interesting thing about Connecticut's law and zoning, if you have a subdivision that predates zoning, you have a protected development lot, but you have, if you're building it today and it predates zoning, you have to meet our standards today. If you have a subdivision that was approved after we had subdivision regs, you can build for the first time based on the regs that were in place when that subdivision was approved. Now, because these lakes were created long before the Ashford had subdivision regulations, these guys have no standards, so they have to meet our regs. But they're absolutely building lots.
Mike, if you have a 50-foot lot, you'd be hard pressed to meet our regs to build anything.
Yeah, so that is where the variance comes into play, because we have basically a legal obligation to allow them to construct a single-family home on the property. Now, we would have to get into a bit of a discussion with them about how we make sure that they are building something that requires the minimum amount of variances, but we can't prevent them from building a house. And here's Ashford Lake. So again, if you look at a lot of these lots, that's 45, 50, 61, 65. So these were all as recorded, and these I got from so this is 1952. These are all building lots.
Yeah, Mike, my memory is foggy, but I recall there being some discussions at one of our meetings a year or two ago, where someone had bought 3 or 4 of these lots and wanted to build on them, and we denied their ability to do that. You might want to check into that.
I have a
is it-
friend who bought a lot on Ashford Lake, one of the 60-foot lots, and was told she couldn't build anything on it.
So there's a couple, I mean, there's a number of things that come into play. Number one, they have to be able to get a septic system and a well on the property. That's
Right.
non-negotiable. They have to be able to demonstrate again that the property is existing in its current state as it did the way it was created. So if you have a 65-foot lot, even if you gave up 5 feet, if you did anything to reduce that parcel size, then you lose your protection. So there is a document that I have. It's called Evaluating a Lot of Record. And when an owner or a realtor calls me and says, I'm interested in knowing if this lot's buildable, I send it to them and I say, these are the steps that you have to go through to demonstrate to me that it is buildable or not buildable. But simply saying it doesn't meet the regulations today is, you got to go a step farther, because as soon as that subdivision map is filed, it creates that lot and it's protected.
Alex, you've got a better memory than I do, but I am sure I recall discussions along these lines.
Yeah, well, we discussed many times about whether we could combine lots of record or not, and I don't know where it ended up, to tell you the truth. At one point, we said you could combine them to add to a property.
But Dick, excuse me, Alex, I'm sorry. Dick,
Yep.
I think the property that you're talking about is those small lots that the Levesque, I can't remember the name, it begins with an L, who come to us every couple of years and saying how they want to build on it, but they were deeded as non-buildable lots.
Okay, so that's maybe,
Yeah, that it's not the zoning commission saying you can't build on them. They were deeded that way.
so that doesn't apply to what Mike's talking about.
Correct.
And you guys, we have a regulation which says any lot of record which does not meet the minimum requirements of these regulations as to lot area and or frontage may be utilized for any residential use permitted in the zone in which such lot is located, provided that all other provisions of the requirements, regulations have been complied with, blah, 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 blah. So that's under our non-conforming section. You may be referring to merger, the doctrine of merger, which says if you have two lots that are next to each other in common ownership and are both undersized, they're automatically merged and become one larger lot. Some towns get into that. It's a little bit complicated because it's called the doctrine of merger, and you have to take into account the intent of the property owner. But in this case, if somebody had two non-conforming lots and they were looking to build, that would be part of the submission of the site plan. In most cases, those lots would be combined. We wouldn't allow them to have a driveway on one and the house on another, or a garage on one and the house on the other. That would be required as part of the site plan if I were reviewing it.
Hey, Mike, I have a question. If they have a 50-foot lot, how are they going to meet the setback requirements of the building code?
So
They'd have to have a 10-foot house.
Right, they would have to either have a 10-foot house or they would have to get a variance. So that, that's why pretty much all the variances that I've seen go to the ZBA since I've been in Ashford were around the lake, because if you look at our setbacks, most of them are a size of the width of the lot. That's what created this whole process in the beginning, because the regs that we have for the RA just do not fit for these parcels.
Yeah, Mike, this kind of bodes to the thing that I sent you from Coventry. I would encourage you to think about incorporating some of that to it, because it basically defaulted to their standard building lot criteria as opposed to the non-conforming. So there might be some language there that could be incorporated in this that would minimize these houses on very small lots. Silence?
I think he was taking notes.
Yeah, I mean, I can look at some of that. I've looked at a number of Marlboro, Lebanon. I've looked at a bunch of others, and I'm trying to keep this reg simple so that the intent is clear. But I'll try to look at that and see if we can incorporate it. The stormwater stuff, since you already have that section, I'm just pointing back to it rather than incorporating it for everything here. But I can look at that.
I would simply because I was a resident of Coventry when we were going through all of that. And the overall arching thing that was going through the town government was making sure we didn't end up in default of was EPA then, deep now, that we didn't get imposed to put in town-sponsored sewers. So, which I think should be our, one of our major objectives of this whole thing, that we don't end up defaulting to have to put in sewers in either of the lakes. So I think that regulation probably is the more appropriate, much more appropriate than Lebanon for sure.
Okay, thank you, Dick. Mike, are there any other issues you've been wrestling with, or items that need to be brought up on this?
The only thing that I would really, would like some feedback on, if you have any now, is the idea. And again, I can work with the wording, and I've got to look at some other regs, but the idea of allowing something like an uncovered deck to project into the rear yard setback. Most of what we see around the lake are people that want to have a deck so that they can go outside and they can sit and they can look at the water. And so I'm trying to come up with a process by which we can allow these things without having to create a regulation with a rear yard setback just to include that, because then everybody's going to put their porches and their additions and their garages to it, right? So I'm trying to create a specific caveat just for decks so that people don't build right up to that line with the structure, because we're trying to keep things, from being so expansive. And again, a lot of towns have what's called a veranda line, which is typically 10 feet from the setback. But
Is that like the Mendoza line of 200 batting average?
it's similar.
Yeah, Jeff, decks are okay. Mine is not a scientific thing, but when I drove around Lake Chaffee, I must have seen 20, 30, 40 of these little sheds and garages and other accessory dwellings that were built. And then when I went back to the land use records, I found almost no due diligence on building those things. I didn't see much in the way of decks, so more in the building of a accessory building, to put your lawnmower and stuff like that into. So, decks, okay. All these other accessory buildings, I think we got to regulate better.
Yeah, Michael, the only thing I was thinking about as you were talking about that, and sorry to interrupt you, the issue with the obstruction, yard obstruction, as you call it, is there any way of having that come to a special permit so that we can review it to be sure that they're not putting their deck that is 3 feet away or whatever away from the next house over or something like that? I know we have our setback issues and things, but
Yeah, I mean, you could, I don't know what the sort of the amount, the volume would be. I mean, at the end of the day, they're still going to have to demonstrate to me through a site plan what it is. The one other thing
okay.
that I
Oh, no,
have-
that's fine. That's fine. If that review takes place, obviously.
Oh,
you're-
yeah, for sure.
You're only allowing them, as I understand it, you're only allowing them the first 5 feet of the setback. So they'd still have, well, I guess the side yard is
15.
only 10 feet, so they'd only have 10 feet left, or they don't have 5 feet left.
So we're only adding that projection for the rear yard, so they
The rear
can't
yard,
project to
right.
the side.
Yeah.
And I have a section in the bulk table for minimum separation, which requires a minimum of 25 feet between dwellings regardless.
Yeah.
That ties into just building code and fire code and not wanting these structures to be so close if there is a fire.
One goes up, they all go up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've worked in towns along the shoreline, ZBAs even that have won a court case about requiring sprinklers because these things get so close and the fire department just can't get the water on it in time. So that's why I limited it to the rear yard so that we're not protruding closer to neighbors. It's just giving them that ability to try to get a deck, again, not covered, not finished, no additions, no garages, just an uncovered deck.
No, that's fine. I have no issue with that. Anyone
I
else?
think that's fine. I actually have one that probably meets that criteria.
Conflict of interest, Janet.
Recuse. We'll find you recused from that vote. Yeah, I like it. I like the thought process. I like the ability to cut down on the need for either assuming that we're going to shoot them down and they go to ZBA and get what they wanted anyways on that, or even get more than they should have gotten. So that's fine.
Okay, I will tighten it up based on some of the things we've talked about, so that hopefully at the next meeting, we can get have a final version to potentially send off to the various lake associations and schedule a hearing.
Okay. Anything else?
For me,
Okay. Any other discussion from the group on the Lake District regs?
Nope.
I think they look pretty good. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for all your efforts, Mike.
no problem.
Okay. Moving on. Moving on to the item we said we wouldn't put on the schedule again, but they passed the law, so it's not discussion. It's been passed by the Senate and signed by the governor in a much scaled down version. The House Bill 6107 regarding an act concerning the Zoning Enabling Act, accessory apartments, training for certain land use officials, municipal affordable housing plans, and Commission on Connecticut's development and future. Dick had provided a document that we will send out to the members that is by the Office of Legislative Research that did I won't call it a synopsis because it is quite complete and long in nature, but and then Michael also provided another piece, again, from the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association, a summary of basically the same legislation that took place. I don't know if Mike, did you want to speak to any certain items on this, or I'm not expecting you to give us a full summary or anything like that, but you know, some of the points on here that you think are of a significant nature.
Yeah, and the CCAPA, and I think there was one that was also sent out, and I can't remember now, there've been so many blasts from so many different people. The CCAPA one was written just as a synopsis following the various revisions. I think, you know, the things that are important to note is the accessory dwelling units must be allowed as of right, which means not by special permit by January of 2023. However, a municipality, if it so chooses, can opt out of that if they want to. We allow accessory dwelling units now, so this is really not a big deal for Ashford. One of the things that's important to note is that if you create a housing unit through the accessory dwelling units, you know, the problem that a lot of towns have is that if you're trying to get to 10% affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing stock, every time you add a housing unit, you now get further and further away from getting to the 10%. So there's a caveat in there which basically says that these accessory dwelling units will not count against the town's efforts towards getting to the 10%. So if we add 500 accessory dwelling units, we're not now 500 units further away from getting to the 10%. That's, I think, important.
Because the accessory dwelling units do not count as affordable housing because they're not deed restricted, things like that.
And they don't count, right? So they don't make our efforts harder. It says we can't prohibit cottage food activities, which is defined by the state. It reduces some parking standards. So it directs that by default, required parking for housing shall not exceed 1 space per studio, 1 bedroom, or 2 spaces for larger housing units. Basically, there were certain towns that were allowing these uses, but then requiring so much parking that they could never demonstrate it, and it was effectively a prohibition. There was a requirement, there's a requirement now, I actually wrote this, that if you're doing zoning enforcement in Connecticut, you have to be certified by Casio. So that starts as of January of 23. And training for planning and zoning commissioners. It was originally written to require 6 hours in the first year and 4 hours every year after. That was the original template, and it was for all land use commissions. Now it's 4 hours every 2 years, which will apply to all you folks. So those are the important ones. There's some other stuff which are really, it's less applicable to us. Existing statute provides the regulation. There's a section about mobile homes, which basically says you can't treat a manufactured home differently, substantially different from a single family home. We don't really do this here. Wellington does, so we're gonna have to make some changes in Wellington. But overall, it was fairly stripped down from the original language. So not anything all that scary, I would say.
If I can,
Dick, yeah, absolutely. I was going to reach out to you. I know you went through the OLR response or the review. Is there anything that jumped out at you on this?
well, I think one of the things that we need to consider as a town and commission is these abilities to do the opt-outs. Frankly, I'm all for accessory dwelling units, whether they be rented or used for in-law apartments or what have you. But going along with the restrictions that the bill puts forth hamstrings us. So I think it's in the interest of the town to go forward with the opt-out provision. And there are other opt-out provisions within this regulation that the town can avail themselves to. They were really there to address things within the Fairfield County people, not so much Ashford. At least it allows us not to be restricted by them. The other thing that I would caution us on is there is a commission put in place that is charged with examining all of the land use regulations relative to affordable housing and racial desegregation and everything you can possibly put in there. And it comes up with a requirement to come out with recommendations. This simply says this is only the first step in what is going to be coming from Hartford. I could recognize the reticence of the commission to be politically proactive. I'm personally politically active because I think I don't want to see Hartford taking over control of local issues. But there is a movement to try to do that. And that really is like the back end of all this. Read the last section of the Connecticut summary of this. This is not a partisan summary. It's the summary produced by the legislative research group that says what's there. They have established this commission, and this commission is going to be looking at ways to expand what they've done. So it's not over yet. You know, we are going to be faced with more of this. This is not something we can simply ignore. If we were to not opt out of some of the items that we're able to opt out of, we would have to rewrite substantial amounts of our land use regulations. So, number one, let's put in place the process to opt out of the things that we can opt out of. And let's two, be vigilant to what's happening.
Which,
Okay.
well, I think we need to investigate for, I'm not sure what we'd have to substantially rewrite. Mike, what's,
So, well, we all, section, Article 4B, Section 2, subsection 6A allows in-law apartments as a permitted use. They're already allowed as of right. So we don't need to, we already allow this. So for the ADUs, I don't think there's anything we need to do. I mean, we could, if we wanted to opt out, we would have to change our regulations because we already allow them as of right without a public hearing.
Mike, what you would have to opt out is you would allow 4 family, 4 units on a lot. You could allow expansion of the ADUs. There's quite a few things that are in there. Read them and before you make that comment.
But we already allow accessory apartments. They are a permitted use in our regulations.
Yeah, but
already.
they're limited to in-law apartments. They're not rental apartments. We do not allow rental apartments. When these were written, we didn't
That's
allow
not-
that.
That's not true.
We
We
took
don't-
out, we took out the in-law verbiage.
We can't regulate who occupies both units. We require that there be some familial attachment either in one of the units, but we cannot require that it be occupied by a family in both.
Yeah, but for instance, I won't cite line and verse, but it removes the requirement for a passage between the primary residence and the in-law residence, and it goes on and on from that. There's a lot that's in there. And my comment is, why let Hartford regulate us when we don't have to? We can opt out of it and simply stick by what we put in place. If you don't think what we've done is right, why should we let Hartford dictate to us?
And for those of you that are wondering what opt-out means, it would mean a requirement of a vote by the zoning commission to pass by 2/3 to opt out of such a act, and then 2/3 of the legislative body. And in this case, they identify the legislative body as the selectmen, Board of Selectmen. It doesn't need to be a town meeting. They've identified the Board of Selectmen as the legislative authority to vote on that. It would be
Jeff,
2/3.
you're absolutely correct on that. And that doesn't limit anything for us as the town. It simply gives us control.
I was just defining the opt-out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on the process. And my comment is that if we go that route, it gives us control over what we as a planning and zoning commission enacts, rather than going through all of the items that are within that section, which are pretty extensive. And I think everyone here is not privy to reading the details of this. So I think,
I would agree, and I would ask each of the members of the commission to review this. Take the and don't just take the word of the summary or the research group. Take a look and please try to read the bill itself, especially take it a section at a time and go through it and see what the effect would be for Ashford and what that would mean.
one of the things that I got a really kick out of, because in, spearheading the plan of conservation and development, the most important thing that every resident of this town wanted to preserve was the rural character of Ashford. And if you read through what's in this bill, it basically says you can't use preservation of the rural character or any character as a means of influencing the zoning in the town. And
Well, you can, you just have to accurately and definitively define character.
but
You can't just use it as a catch-all phrase.
no, but it was a a lightning point for people that I dealt with when I was spearheading the plan of conservation development.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's uh, anything that gives more power to someone other than us, I don't think is a good thing for the town. My personal opinion.
I'll try for the next meeting to come up with sort of a better synopsis of the ADU portion of the bill. I can pull out the actual language and see if I can, I mean, we can certainly send around either the OLR stuff like Jeff had mentioned, so that people can kind of see what we're dealing with. You know, the one thing that I think is important to point out is, you know, the reason that they took aim at the word character is that character is not tangible. So someone can define and say, I want to put in a 4-unit housing complex, 4 units, middle housing, what a development, and it meets all the criteria, the regulations, and they have a traffic study that shows that it's not going to create issues. And, you know, they can design it perfectly, but if somebody says it doesn't meet their impression of community character, they can deny it. And that's not tangible. So it was very hard to deal with those types of land use decisions. So as Jeff, I think, was getting at, trying to use the existing criteria makes it easier for everybody to be on the same page. But I will look at what the regulations and what the bill is specifically for the ADUs. And then I think that it would also require an endorsement from the Board of Selectmen, and you know that process would require them to also endorse this idea. But I can have that for the next meeting.
Yeah, and I could have sent out to you, Jeff and Alex, some quote unquote partisan documents, but I didn't. I simply sent out what were the summaries from
Absolutely.
from the state.
Absolutely, the OLR group, yes.
They're
That's
there.
actually, they're quoted in the CCAPA group as a link also to see what their results were.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, if someone wants to do something in the town that's around the lines with what is being proposed by Desegregate CT or whatever organization, we can do it. But why should we agree to having the state constrain the town of Ashford to what we can and cannot do? You know, within the ability that we can opt out, we should opt out. That doesn't mean that we can't opt back in. It simply means that we have the ability as a commission to exercise what should be our elected abilities to do what we think is right for the town. You know, I can't say enough. Why do we want to give up what we can and cannot do to the state?
This is Mark Schnubel, being probably the newest member. What are the negatives of if you decide to opt out? You know, are there negative ramifications if a town opts out of this?
For the accessory dwelling units, the opt-out basically means that you don't have to allow them as of right. So you could either continue to prohibit them, or if you were a town that prohibited them, or you could require specific criteria or require a special permit. So there's no limit. It would go, you know, it just sort of takes away the requirement that you allow them as of right. I'm skimming the bill. I'm not seeing anything beyond the one unit that, you know, as far as allowing 4 units or anything else. But so I'm going to come back to, we allow accessory dwelling units as of right currently. We call them in-law apartments, but they're accessory. That's exactly what an accessory dwelling unit is. So, you know, I think we've already gone there. I don't know that we would want to create a text to opt out and then have a text amendment to dial back something that, you know, we really stepped forward on when we did the last revision.
Yeah, Mike, if you read the whole bill, which I guess you haven't, there is more things relative to putting higher density development on a single lot. You know, it's there. I mean, my 2 cents worth is why give control to someone else instead of us? I mean, if you want to go do what they want to do, we can do it, but it's our decision to do it. Why would we want to abdicate the authority of this commission to the state? I mean, that makes no sense to me whatsoever. And the other thing too, is this whole issue of affordable housing. And I'll take an example of someone I know personally that rents out their quote unquote in-law apartment as a rental unit, Ralph Fletcher. Do you think Ralph Fletcher is going to put a deed restriction on his property that will in perpetuity make that rental unit in his house a affordable housing unit? I don't think anyone's going to do that.
He would only have to put a deed restriction if he wanted it to qualify for towards the affordable housing criteria. The bill does not require that if someone creates an accessory dwelling unit, it also be an affordable housing unit.
No.
It simply creates the process because there's an understanding that the smaller the housing unit, the cheaper it will be. And so by allowing folks to create the ADU, you will then in turn create lower cost housing options in a town because it's inherently going to be in an existing structure. So you're going to be creating low cost, but you don't want to make the jump from accessory dwelling unit to affordable because again, there's no mandate that they be deed restricted.
If you're indeed trying to have more affordable housing in Ashford, and you're thinking that this ADU is going to create a pathway to that, that means the people that own those properties are going to have to agree to deed restrict them.
I
And
think you're missing what Mike is saying.
There's a difference between attainable and affordable.
So accessory dwellings are smaller, they're going to cost less. Younger people might buy them, older people, live in them. Older people might live in them. They're more affordable than a single house, but they're not going to qualify as affordable dwellings because they're not deed restricted, but they're still allowing people to spend less on housing.
yep, and Janet, I'm all for that. My point is that concomitant with all of this, we've got to come up with a plan for affordable housing for the town. And anything associated with these accessory dwelling units, unless the property owner decides to deed restrict them, will never count against the affordable housing metric that the state is asking of us. I think that we should allow anyone that wants to put an apartment in their basement and their, addition and rent it out to whoever we want to rent it out to. So be it. I really don't have a problem with that. And we should change our land use regulations to reflect to that, irrespective to what this bill is asking for. But we also have to, and Mike and his company is working on an affordable housing plan. And luckily, none of the penalizing aspects of not meeting the affordable housing plans passed in this current bill, but we still have to submit an affordable housing plan to the state within the next 6 months to a year. I don't know the exact date, but we have to
By July 1 of
we have to do that.
22.
But that's, I think, a separate issue from having accessory apartments in buildings whether it's 1, 2, or 3 accessory apartments, and if they're providing a way for, your grandmother, your son-in-law, or whoever to live, related or not related, I don't really see that's a big issue for the town, and we should allow that to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll circle back to the point with going forward to get the exception, which is permitted by law. If we have the exception, we can still do anything we want to do, but we don't give the control to the state.
Okay. One of the other pieces I just wanted to go over briefly. Thank you, Dick. One of the other pieces I just wanted to go over briefly had to do with the training for planning and zoning commissioners. Those of you with multiple years still left on your sentence. I just wanted to let you know what they're requiring is, again, 4 hours of training every 2 years. One of those hours to include training on fair and affordable housing. Commissioners must satisfy that initial training requirement by January 1st of 2024 and within 1 year of election appointment thereafter. And Office of Policy and Management will be establishing guidelines for this training. And I'm sure different groups, whether it's the land use lawyers or, again, CCAPA or Yukon Clear, will come up with training sessions that and include the materials that are needed for things. So just to think about that, they will be requiring training of and documented and tracked training of the officers, commissioners going forward. But again, no requirement until January 1st of 2024.
Yeah, Jeff, I think the training that's been offered, and I'm not sure the name of the association, but I know our attorney participates in that.
Yeah,
and-
I believe that's the group of land use lawyers. I don't know what the exact grouping is.
But that's usually held for a half day plus 1/2. And I've attended them 2 or 3 times and have found them extremely, informative. So even if they didn't require this, I would recommend everyone from the commission attend those.
And it's something that we could potentially, be ahead of the game on in getting people to please, take the time. We pay for it. You get lunch. We pay for mileage. And again, if we get a group of us going down or whatever to attending these sessions, I believe they're held in March usually, and it's at Wesleyan or Trinity or one of the Hartford schools down there.
No, I
Yeah.
think they were in one of the, I can't recall exactly, but they, at one point, one of them was at NECOG. But they are at various locations, and even though we didn't have this as a requirement, I think it's very good for everyone to go.
Mhm. And the other nice thing is you get to feel like you're not alone. I mean,
Yeah.
no matter your knowledge level, you'll find somebody who knows more than you, and you'll find somebody who knows less than you.
Yeah.
So again, it's a good session, and if you choose to speak to somebody and get to know them and talk to them, you've got a contact that you can always reach out to, or contacts you can reach out to.
And the fact that these are, 4 to 6 hours would easily meet the requirement of this bill.
So getting into the habit of it would be great. So, okay, so more to come on that. Anything else from Michael or Dick on those? I know you two are probably the most. Janet, I don't know if you had any other input. Okay. Moving on to discussion. This is something that Dick brought up for the last meeting, and we said we would put it on the agenda. Discussion on placing a moratorium on cannabis commercial business applications in Ashford, similar to the proposed moratorium that Mansfield is speaking about, a 9-month, I believe they were putting on, in order to get further information on this. Now, we're still sitting in a situation where the legislature, if they had done their job, would have either passed or denied this bill, and we could have been talking in much more concrete measures. Right now, it's probably going to be voted on in a special session in a couple of weeks on this. Of course, from what I see is proposed right now, and someone please correct me who's on top of this, I believe the current effective date or first effective date for retail business is it January of 23 or July of 23?
It's quite a ways away.
Yeah.
And frankly, having a moratorium like what Mansfield's done simply gives us the ability to stand back and think about what we want to do. The most potential for Ashford would be from the agricultural side, where someone runs a farm, wants to start growing, pot. But the thing I would add to this, and keep in mind, I grew up in the 60s, and I won't say what I did or didn't do back then. But as I drive from Ashford to Sturbridge, which is the closest town to me to go shopping, I pass, last count was 4 billboards for places to buy pot, including the lasers, which I get the biggest kick out of, which is right on across the street from Yankee Spirits. So you can buy buy your booze and go across the street and buy your pot. So I mean, it's going to happen one way or the other. Whether and I'm a conservative person, and I don't advocate, nor would I do, but it's going to come here anyhow. But at the same token, we should at least have a chance to pause in the town as to what we permit and don't permit.
Well, again, if we're talking about a moratorium, actually, I'll open this up. I'll be quiet right now. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on this issue?
Well, I think it's a good idea to spend some time figuring out what we want to, how we want to approach this. So maybe a moratorium would be a good idea.
Well, do we need a moratorium? Because right now we have effectively 18 months before retail sales are allowed in here. And again, even the moratorium from Mansfield was 9 months from this point, or whenever passage takes place in the state.
If you don't have a moratorium, even though they can't start selling it, somebody could start buying a building or, setting things up. I don't know.
And again, that wouldn't come to us, them buying a building or
Well,
whatever.
No, it would come to us in terms of a permitted use. If someone wanted to build a growing facility, that would become a potential permitted use. If you consider agriculture, it would be there. I don't think the chance that Ashford is going to be a hub for selling cannabis, but I think there definitely could be a potential for growing. And I would think that I don't, I've been recently meeting with the Agricultural Commission to find ways to expand their businesses. So no one's mentioned this as a expansion, but I wouldn't put it past some people in town.
It's not going to be a little section of the farm stand there. The little,
Oh,
box?
that would be the growing part. But, but
Yes.
I don't think Ashford on our own are going to stop this thing one way or the other. And I'm kind of on this side with Janice. Maybe a resolution is not going to make one difference one way or the other, because if someone wants to do this, it'll come as a special permit because it's not a permitted use right now anyhow. So I don't think anyone's going to set up a retail shop on, in Warrenville, in the near future.
So I just want to jump in quick. Couple of things that I would point out. Number one, in the general commercial zone, retail is an allowed use, which is permitted, which means they wouldn't come before you if it was an existing building.
Right.
If they just wanted to sell. If they wanted to do warehousing or distribution or something that was large scale, then perhaps manufacturing, I guess, they would come in as a special permit use. But the other thing that I would ask is, if somebody wants to sell something that the state is allowed, I mean, there's plenty of places that grow and get a lot of tax money from buildings that grow these, Simsbury has a huge grow facility. It's in an industrial area. So, the buildings are built to a really high standard beyond food quality. They're worth a lot of money and you get a lot of tax. So I would just want to make sure that we're sure that this is something that needs to be regulated differently beyond what you have in the regulations already, because we've got a lot of terms that already exist.
Right, right.
And my sense is that the Agricultural Commission, if someone wanted to do this, they would be supporting it as far as growing. The sale portion, I don't think anyone's going to drive into Ashford, as a sales point where there's so many other places. And my point about going to Massachusetts, it's all over the place there. So I would err at the point where maybe this is not needed.
And we're
Well,
gonna,
when you say this is not needed, what do you mean? You mean that we don't need to do a moratorium or a resolution or anything?
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry, Alex, you were going to say something?
you're gonna see the stores open everywhere. It's like the smoke shops they have all over the place now. Every town has one somewhere. They have this, not cigarettes, but the other things. They're all over the place, the smoke shops, and they'll be selling them. They'll be getting into the marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it, sales, and it's going to happen. And I don't think a moratorium is going to really. We're just going to sit around on a moratorium. We're not going to do anything for a year and a half, and then we'll decide to do something. So I don't think it's going to change anything with a moratorium.
I think I tend to agree with you with the 18 months we have and the information that will start flowing through here. I mean, I know I'm going to try. I think their hearing is on June 23rd or something for Mansfield for this. And I'll be sitting in on that. And again, there'll be a lot of information for us to probably act well before. If we do need any type of special reg or control on this, we feel that's needed. We probably have time to do that. So I think putting something in place right now is somewhat premature.
I would recommend we table this for now.
Okay, I'm good. Anyone else?
Mhm. I agree.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Moving on, new business. I have nothing under new business at this point, and we will obviously put the discussion from the rest of the hearing continuation for next time on there.
The only thing that I wanted to just add is that over the weekend, I did get the Hole in the Wall Game Camp is going to be moving forward with rebuilding. And so they need to get that all squared away. They had planned some expansion and then the buildings burned. So that got put on pause. So he emailed me a copy of the application on Sunday. I'll have the hard copies hopefully tomorrow, assuming they're at town hall. So that will require a special permit. So that will be, since it's submitted, you're being received today. So I'll try to schedule that for July. I imagine they're trying to move as fast as possible, but it's as fast as we can do it.
So we'll have 2 hearings likely on that day?
Unless I can't get it scheduled or there's something with the application that they didn't have, yes.
Right, okay.
It's not new business, but it's continuing. I had started putting together a package on looking at the zoning regulations at exit 72 and around. I've done a little bit on that, but I've had a few other personal issues that have slowed me down. But I'm still working on that, and
Okay,
hopefully we'll have something done in the next month or so.
okay, very good. Thank you for that. Um,
Could you tell me what that was again? You're working on, something.
that was in regard to the interstate exchange, the IID zone.
Okay.
And Valerie, it's the charge that I took on a couple of meetings
Right.
ago
Yep.
to look at revising those
Right.
regulations.
I
and
get it.
Coming up with recommendations for the commission to examine.
Mike, zoning report, besides what you just reported?
We're really, really busy with complaints. And some permits and stuff, building department, we've got a lot of stuff going on. Some compliance, we're getting there, and some others we're probably gonna have the marshal do some service on, but we're pretty busy.
Yeah, Mike, what is going on with the old package store at Lake Chafee?
That property is, he submitted building permits, he's converting it to a single family dwelling.
Oh, wow.
Amazing.
I think the
That's-
building was too far beyond any viability from a commercial side.
No, they let the liquor permit lapse. So there would never be another liquor permit there. And I can't imagine another building going there competing with the old Smitty's. So, and I find it incredulous. Someone wants to build a single family house there, but go for it.
There was a question I had. Oh, no, and Mike, just one thing, I don't know if you're in process on that, but with July 1 creeping up on us, I think you said you had a template for some type of contract for the consulting regarding the affordable housing effort coming up.
Yeah, but I have the whole grant application, so assuming we get the
Oh.
grant, it won't matter.
That's true. Well, it gets you paid somehow, doesn't it?
Well, so the grant, I guess I should back up and talk real quick because I'm looking, it's almost 10. The Department of Housing released round 2 of
Yes,
of
that was something. we
grant
wanted to
monies. Yeah, so last week I wrote a memo. I pulled up together the whole grant application and I submitted it to Christine Abacoff because it has to go, the Board of Finance, or the Board of Selectmen has to adopt a resolution so that it can be submitted as part of the application. They're $15,000 grants. They require no match from the town. So assuming the town gets the grant, we would get it for basically the next fiscal year through the end of the following December, I think. So there would be no out-of-pocket costs to the town.
Right. So this is a second round of those grants, the ones we missed out on before they announced a new grouping. And
Right.
Mike acted on it immediately and we've got it in. And hopefully the sooner we get it in, the more likely we'll be, well, we'll hope, we'll cross our fingers,
Could
basically.
you
30
tell me what the grant is called?
It's an affordable housing plan grant.
Our grant for affordable housing plan.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, anything else, Mike? Say
Nope.
no, please say no. Okay.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes,
one last item. And this is just for the knowledge of the commission.
uh-huh,
Our Town, Our Future and the EDC are exploring applying for a grant to look at ways we can improve the Warrenville, West Ashford corridor so that it would be more of a contiguous town. The idea is to try to slow traffic down. As everyone has seen recently, we've had some horrific accidents in
Yes.
town.
yes,
And we're trying to find a way with some state and federal grants that we can slow traffic down, calm traffic, and change the traffic flow, and then potentially allow for a pedestrian bike path from West Ashford to Warrenville. We're also looking, and Norm, if you're there in the corner, we're also looking at potential for grants for bike trails along Route 89. So these are items that are aimed at trying to make us more of a contiguous town rather than a town along a major state highway.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that, Dick. Thank you.
And we'll be going in front of the Board of Selectmen with some of these proposals within the next meeting or the meeting after.
Excellent. Okay, very good. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second from
Amen.
Alex.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It was a little
Thank
long
you.
and drawn out. Thank you for your attention and your input, and be safe, everyone. Take care.
Night.
Talk
you.
soon.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.